When you first get an extract, it's useful to try to break it into roughly 3 sections, beginning, middle and end. So you want to try and find natural turning points or shifts in the action. One way to think about how to do that with Act 1, Scene 5 is to take the beginning of the scene with Lady Macbeth by herself until the messenger enters as the first of the 3 sections you can split it into. Before you even start to talk about any words the characters say, you need to think about the impact of the action. This is a difference between drama and novels or poems. Think about what you see as well as what you hear. So it's set in Macbeth's castle, and that means we've got a contrast now from the previous scene. So now we've gone from Duncan's palace to Inverness. So this is building the contrast between Duncan and Macbeth. We know there's some underlying tension because of what Macbeth has been saying in the previous scene. Stars, hide your fires, let not light see my black and deep desires. So the juxtaposition between the two of them, the conflict is building. And just before these 2 palace scenes, we've had the witches as well, which is what the root of that tension is because of the prophecies they've made regarding Macbeth. Then, when Lady Macbeth enters, she is alone. Her first appearance emphasises her solitude. Interestingly, she's also the only female character in Shakespeare's tragedies to appear alone in her first appearance. Thinking about how she dies as well, alone, right at the end, and mad, speaking in prose, the only tragic character to do so. Maybe there's something uniquely solitary about Lady Macbeth. She's also reading a letter, which is significant because in Act 5, Scene 1, her last scene, the last time we see her alive, she is writing one in her sleep. So there's lots of irony regarding Shakespeare's portrayal of Lady Macbeth, and irony is partly a structural device. So she reads a letter in her first appearance, and then she is writing one in her last appearance, in her sleep, manically sealing the envelope, putting it away. That's just one of many ironies, like the fact that here she's going to call on night to shroud her in darkness, whereas in her last appearance we find out that she has light by her continually, because it is her command. So she summons darkness, but then is terrified of it and always wants light. Now she's reading a letter. In her last appearance, she's writing one. So you've got to think about the different echoes across the play of what's being set up here. Now you can see just what a big chunk of her first appearance is taken up by Macbeth's words rather than her own. Maybe this is significant. To some extent, does she live vicariously through him? Is that why she drives him on to commit the murder? His achievements, his ambition, are at least partly hers. And if we think about what Macbeth is saying in this letter, it seems designed to inflame her passions, inflame her ambition, because he doesn't tell the whole story. He leaves out the fact that Banquo was there and that prophecies were made about Banquo. Now, both of those things might temper Lady Macbeth's reaction, might put the brakes on it a bit. But Macbeth has left them out. And in fact, never in the play does he actually tell Lady Macbeth that Banquo was there when the witches first gave him the prophecies. She never finds out all the facts regarding Banquo and the witches. Is Macbeth deliberately trying to conceal things? It's also strange because in Act 1, Scene 3, Macbeth had basically resigned himself to chance. If chance will have me king, why chance may crown me without my stir. Now though, the tone of this seems more similar to his two truths are told soliloquy. Happy prologues to the swelling act of the imperial theme. They met me in the day of success, and I have learned by the perfectest report. They have more in them than mortal knowledge. When I burned in desire to question them further, they made themselves air into which they vanished. So he's telling her some of what happened, but the tone is very elated, almost ecstatic, isn't it? Perfectest report, more than mortal knowledge. There's a tone of almost certainty there. Whilst I stood wrapped in the wonder of it, came missives from the king, who all hailed me Thane of Cawdor, by which title before these weird sisters saluted me, and referred me to the coming on of time, with hail, king that shalt be. Now we know that he wasn't wrapped merely in the wonder of it. Shake so my single state of man. It wasn't pure wonder there. There was also some fear or terror. And the way he refers to the future as the coming on of time is interesting too. It's very much got an anticipatory tone. The kingship is coming his way. This have I thought good to deliver thee, my dearest partner of greatness, that thou mightst not lose the dues of rejoicing by being ignorant of what greatness is promised thee. Lay it to thy heart and farewell. So the way in which he's addressing her here as his dearest partner of greatness involves her in the prophecy made about him. If he is going to be king, then she is going to be queen. So the letter, in its tone, excites her because he doesn't want her to remain ignorant of what greatness is promised to her too. He wants it laid to her heart. Now, if he'd included the details about Banquo, lay it to thy heart and farewell. Oh, but by the way, Banquo is not going to be king, but he's going to get kings. That's a spanner in the works. Then think what a different impact it would have.
I'm just going to ask something. Is the sort of common conception is Lady Macbeth pushes Macbeth into doing it, into the murder, but here it's sort of him saying, kind of nudging her in a direction. So this is some sort of weird cycle and egging each other on.
So that's a brilliant point. Now, most people say that Lady Macbeth forces Macbeth to commit the murder and taunts and goads him into it, and that he is the one who doesn't really want it to happen. I think that is an overly simplistic reading of the dynamic between them. I think that Macbeth does have some internal conflict. His conscience warns him against the murder. Remember, in Holinshed, the real historical Macbeth isn't afraid and feels no remorse afterwards. Shakespeare, though, has him afraid to commit the murder in the first place, and then afterwards suffering terribly as a result. So I think Shakespeare is keen to present Macbeth as a round rather than flat character. There is internal division there. But I also think there's a sense in which Macbeth wants to be talked into it. So yes, he's afraid of it, but he, knowing Lady Macbeth, has constructed the letter in such a way as to incite her to talk him into it. It's as if he wants her to give voice to some of his own internal desires that he is afraid to side with over his conscience. He wants her to talk him into it. That's one way to think about why this letter omits some of the details about Banquo.
Is that like when you don't want to do some work and you say to a friend, like, oh, I don't need to do it, do I? And they say, no, you don't need to do it.
Yeah, it could be a bit like that. Yeah, that's one way to put it. Right, so she's just read the letter, and now we switch to her actual first words. So her initial words are from Macbeth's letter, but now she's really speaking for herself. Glance thou art, and Cawdor, and shalt be what thou art promised. Yet do I fear thy nature. It is too full of the milk of human kindness to catch the nearest way. Interesting, isn't it, that she thinks that all this is coming their way, the coming on of time. But there's a problem here. Line 2 of her speech, she's already saying yet. Yet do I fear thy nature. She knows what he is like. He has too active a conscience. He has too sensitive a mind or heart or soul to morality. He's too principled to be able to catch the nearest way. She is already thinking about the nearest way to do it. She's not thinking that they can get there the long way and just wait and chance will achieve it. She's saying the nearest way, the nearest way will be murder. She isn't using the word, but she's already thinking of murdering Duncan. The nearest and quickest way to get this kingship will be to kill him. Thou wouldst be great, art not without ambition. That understatement there. perhaps makes it even more powerful. Art not without ambition. Meaning he's extremely ambitious. Yet, there's a problem, because he's without the illness should attend it. So ambition needs illness to go alongside it. The language used here, illness, is intriguing, isn't it? Traditionally in tragedy, the downfall of the protagonist is due to a character flaw, or a hamartia, according to Aristotle's scheme. It can be a bit misleading to try to look for just one flaw, one fault with the character, as if it somehow unlocks everything about them, especially in Shakespeare, where the characters have got multiple flaws like people in real life do. But the language illness here does seem to suggest that there might be something hubristic, something about Macbeth's ambition that is excessive, that goes beyond the proper boundaries or limits. What thou wouldst highly, that wouldst thou holily. Look at the pairing of highly and holily there. So she's playing on the idea that what you want to achieve in terms of high rank and status, you would also want to achieve via moral or holy means. Is there a contrast between highly and holily there? She thinks that the two can't go together. If you want to make it to the top, you have to play dirty. Highly and holy are incompatible. Duncan, as the gracious king, the sainted king, perhaps has his problems. He's revered as being good in the terms of saintly, but he didn't fight in the battle, and the state that the kingdom is in at the start of the play seems to suggest that he is unable to rule well. There are people challenging his power. One of the texts in the background of this play is Machiavelli's The Prince, a political tract, and Machiavelli's view was that it's more important to be feared than to be loved. So Macbeth and perhaps Lady Macbeth are more Machiavellian. There's an element of realpolitik in how they treat people in their dealings with them. Forget about holiness if what you want to focus on is getting to and staying at the top. Wouldst not play false, and yet wouldst wrongly win. Again, look at that pair. Playing false is what you don't want to do, and yet you want to wrongly win. She seems to be assuming again there that murder is what's going to happen. They're going to break the rules of the game, as it were, catch the nearest way, win wrongly, and yet Macbeth is too scared to play false. So implicit through all these different criticisms of him is that they want the same thing, but only she is willing to take the means necessary to get there. Macbeth wants the outcome, but doesn't want to get there the way she thinks he should. Thou'dst have, great Glamis, that which cries, thus thou must do, if thou have it, and that which thou rather dost fear to do, than wishes should be undone. Look how do is starting to echo here. We know this is important from the opening scene of the play. Do and done and deed, a structural pattern that runs through the whole thing. So Lady Macbeth here is playing on that. It's starting to link her language to Macbeth's and to the witches as well into this very complicated network. Thus thou must do, if thou have it, and that which rather thou dost fear to do than wishest should be undone. Let's see if we can unpack what's going on here. What's doing the crying here is the crown. That is the crown. So it's the crown that cries, thus thou must do, if thou have it. So there are things Macbeth must do to catch the nearest way, to get the crown and to kill Duncan. But the problem is that he's afraid to do them, even though he doesn't wish for them to be undone. So he wants them to happen, but he's afraid to do them. And it's significant that undone comes in here. Intriguingly, Macbeth has got the most un plus verb coinages of any Shakespeare play. These what are called neologisms. 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 It's the first recorded usage of a word. So basically Shakespeare is inventing the word undone here. So when you're listening to the speech and thinking about why he's felt the need to invent a word, a neologism, new word, undone, you've got to see that in the context of the patterning around done in the whole play. So just in case you're interested, the uncoinages in Macbeth are unbend, unfix, unmake, unprovoke, unspeak, and unsex, in addition to this one.
You say Macbeth has the most neologisms?
Macbeth has got the most un plus verb coinages.
So it's the first time it's ever recorded in English language.
Yeah, so a neologism is the first time it's recorded in English, and there are plenty of them in Macbeth, more than in any other Shakespeare play that have un plus a verb coinage. Un plus a verb coinage. Like unfix my hair, for example, which we just saw earlier in the previous scene. That's a neologism too. Now, what's her solution to this going to be? She knows he's too afraid to achieve what she wants him to. They've got the same goal, but he is not going to be able to do it, she worries, because he's basically too soft. He's too principled. Well, the solution is, hie thee hither, so hurry here, that I may pour my spirits in thine ear, and chastise with the valour of my tongue all that impedes thee from the golden round, which fate and metaphysical aid doth seem to have thee crowned withal. So the solution is that when he comes to her, she will be able to correct him, goad him, taunt him, using her words. So her power, her valour, her strength is in her tongue. And the image of pouring spirits in the ear of Macbeth is a powerful one. And in fact, you can take it back a level and think about how the letter has poured spirits in hers. So we had the great point earlier about how there's a dynamic between them. He is withholding some things and inflaming her passions, her desires, in order to get her to respond to him. So it's like a cycle between the two of them. And in fact, indirectly, through the letter, the spirits that have been poured into her ear are in fact the witches' words. So the witches, via the letter, incite Lady Macbeth, and then she, in turn, by trying to get Macbeth steeled against the deed, incites him. And yet, there's a curious evasion in her language, because she doesn't talk about the murder directly. That which cries, thus thou must do, if thou have it. So we're never actually using murder or assassination directly. In fact, assassination is another neologism later in the play. If the assassination could trammel up the consequence, Macbeth won't say murder either there. He uses assassination instead, making it sound a bit more technical, a bit more acceptable. He's rationalising it.
Wait, so was that the first time assassination was ever used?
Yeah, it's pretty cool, isn't it? Yeah. So assassination, Macbeth's got the first time the word, as far as we know, was ever used in English. Act 1, Scene 7. If it were done when 'tis done, then 'twere well it were done quickly, if the assassination could trammel up the consequence. And the golden round here is, of course, an image of what? The crown. Good. So even there's a kind of evasion. So neither murder nor the crown are talked about explicitly. And also, if fate and metaphysical, i.e. supernatural aid, have got thee crowned withal already, why murder him? Why the obsession with the nearest way? Why not just wait? If fate and metaphysical aid are securing it, just wait for it to fall into your lap. She wants the nearest way. She wants to make sure. Now the messenger comes in. Dramatic, because the messenger has just walked in on her plotting the murder. So there's some real tension there. It's like an awkward entrance to a room, and you can imagine her, as the messenger comes in, trying to quickly regroup, gather her thoughts. It's like, oh, what are you doing? Oh, nothing. Definitely not thinking about killing the king. And now, almost as if he's read her thoughts, the messenger says, the king comes here tonight, And she seems to blurt out something that, in retrospect, she shouldn't have. Doubt mad to say it. In the context of what she's just been saying, it's almost as if she's letting on her own guilty thoughts here. Doubt mad to say it. Like he's read her mind, what she's been plotting. So the messenger works as like a pivot in the scene. It's exciting, it's dramatic, because of course the audience know exactly what she's just been saying. And that line for us, doubt mad to say it, carries much more significance because of the dramatic irony than it does for the messenger when he hears it. The fate, the metaphysical aid, the witches, things seem to be falling into plan. Is not thy master with him? Who, were it so, would have informed for preparation? So please you, it is true, our Thane is coming. One of my fellows had the speed of him, who, almost dead for breath, had scarcely more than would make up his message. Give him tending. He brings great news. The emphasis on speed here is absolutely crucial to the plot and also to the themes. The messenger says that one of his fellows had the speed of Macbeth, which means outdistance him, but to do that left him almost dead for breath. This means that Macbeth was riding very quickly. Duncan mentions later that he was unable to overtake Macbeth. There are numerous references to speed and haste elsewhere in the play. It's also a very short play, barely half the length of Hamlet, and in just under 20 minutes of stage action, Duncan is going to be dead. The witches are described as posters of the sea and land, meaning swift travellers, so speed is associated with them. Ross, giving a message from the battle, is described as having a haste that looks through his eyes. So should he look who seems to speak things strange. And crucially, Macbeth uses the odd phrase of outrunning the pauser, reason, later on, which Francis Ferguson described as summing up the mood and action of the whole play. On one level, this is about being impulsive, acting without thought, acting before conscience might convince you not to act. Macbeth says later that words to the heat of deeds to cool breath gives. So perhaps he's rushing, riding quickly to the castle so that he can act on the thoughts he's having about the witches. And now the messenger exits. So the scene is now set for Macbeth to come in. But oddly, even though she's anticipating Macbeth coming, our Thane is coming, she now doesn't refer to him or even allude to him at all until he actually enters. So when she's calling on the spirits to prepare the mood, the atmosphere, prepare her for the murder, to unsex her, she doesn't mention Macbeth. So when she's actually plotting, trying to get ready for it, there's no mention of Macbeth. Isn't that strange? It's as if she now sees herself as a solo murderer, despite having just been called dearest partner of greatness. So he enters quite a long time after. In this whole speech, she's talking as if it's just her alone that is going to do this. At the end, my keen knife, see not the wound it makes. No mention of Macbeth there when she actually has the image of the killing in mind. Now, when the raven enters, it's significant because a raven traditionally is an omen of death. The raven also will eat the chicks of other birds. So as a animal for Lady Macbeth, who said she would be willing to take her baby breastfeeding from her nipple and dash its brains out on the stones if she'd sworn to, it's an appropriate one, especially given what happens to Lady Macduff's children as well. She talks about little wren being able to defend its nest, emphasising her maternal instinct and her femininity, but Lady Macbeth and the raven and the killing of little chicks and the symbol of death is a foil, so a contrast to Lady Macduff. In mythology, because of its black colour, the crow is associated with the idea of beginnings. Blackness and beginnings is also expressed in symbols like the maternal night or the primordial darkness or the fertilising earth. That's an interesting point in connection with Lady Macbeth because she has no children, and in the darkness of night that she now summons, what she's giving birth to is murder. Traditionally, because of its flight, the raven is also considered as a messenger. Now, just after the messenger exits is when Lady Macbeth mentions the raven's hoarse croak. So it's as if after the messenger leaves, the raven is a new messenger. In classical cultures, the raven was also said to possess mystical powers, in particular the ability to foresee the future, and its core was an important part in rites of divination. Does this raven tell Lady Macbeth something about the future that she feels in the instant? Finally, as a solitary bird, the raven in Christian symbolism is also an allegory of solitude. The reflexive pronoun, the raven himself is hoarse, emphasises that even the raven, a symbol of death, seems affected by what it foresees in the future, as if the atmosphere is uniquely dark and evil. Note that Lady Macbeth appeared on stage alone, and now, the messenger having departed, she's alone on stage again. And during this speech, she makes no reference to Macbeth, even though later he is the one who commits the murder. Now she's talking about herself, as if she is the one to do it. The raven is hoarse that croaks the fatal entrance of Duncan under my battlements is an important image. Not only is it the first of the thresholds in the play, so we've got a crossing over here. Duncan coming into Macbeth's castle is the first of the big 6 thresholds. So remember, there are 6 moments in the play in which someone crosses over a threshold or doorway, and then afterwards everything is changed. Duncan enters Macbeth's castle. Macbeth enters Duncan's bedchamber. The porter opens the door after the murder. Macbeth goes to visit the witches. The murderers go into Macduff's home. And then at the end, the liberators enter Dunsinane. So one way to think about the structural arrangement of the play is in terms of these thresholds. Pivotal or liminal moments in the play where some transition is crossed and then the action shifts markedly. So this first one, fatal entrance, of course, is a pun on fatal. On the one hand, it's fatal as in mortal to him. When he enters under my battlements, that's going to be the end of him. Fatality. But on the other hand, it's fatal as in fated. Fate and metaphysical aid, which she's just mentioned. So just be alert to the nuance, the subtlety of the language. You've also got here on stage, Lady Macbeth, when she enters, might have been up on the battlements, i.e. the upper level of the stage. So you see her far above the level of the actual platform of the stage itself. She's in the upper level of it. So that makes it more dramatic. She's more imposing. She seems more commanding. And now let's look what happens to her language. Come, you spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, unsexed, neologism, me here. The language here is commanding. The imperative, come, and it's an invocation, isn't it? There's something witch-like about her already, summoning the powers of darkness to unsex her, i.e. remove her femininity, and fill me from the crown to the toe top full of direst cruelty. And she's not playing around. She doesn't say dire. The superlative direst. Macbeth later on talks about slaughter familiar to my direst thoughts, echoing this perhaps. So direst cruelty is a language of extremity, and she also wants to be filled from the crown to the toe. So that again is an image of being overwhelmed. There might be something sexual about this as well. So being filled from the crown to the toe, top full of the evil, the spirits. In some ways, this is like a love or a sex scene between Lady Macbeth and whatever demons are coming to possess her. So that is quite a standard motif or image in demonic possession literature. So thinking about the demons being like a lover to the women. Witches were apparently said to have orgies when they rode around on their broomsticks. And the devil and the witches having orgies. But it's very important to realise that she invites them. This is consensual. Tend on here means wait on, like attend on. And mortal thoughts mean deadly thoughts. So the spirits are waiting on or attendant on her deadly thoughts. Traditionally, the idea is that you can't get possessed unless you somehow invite the devil in. And that's exactly what she's doing here. And a Jacobean audience would have been very clear about that. It's interesting in that respect that top full has the suggestion of brim full or over full, as if they fill her to the top and then some with cruelty, like she is a vessel that cannot contain it. Arguably, by the end of the play, what we see, in fact, is that she is a vessel that breaks. So what she asks, what she invites in here, is too much for her to handle. Now what she asks for is for them to try to stop her conscience working. So make thick my blood, stop up the access and passage to remorse, that no compunctious visitings of nature shake my fell purpose. Blood here is being used as an image of the heart no longer working. So the heart is a symbol of feeling, to do with the conscience. Pangs of conscience or remorse here aren't going to be able to be felt by her because her blood will be so thick. The witches talk about making the gruel thick and slab. Make the gruel thick and slab. Her blood then is becoming a bit like the potion in the witch's cauldron in some ways. Her heart won't be able to pump the blood around anymore, and she will basically lose normal human feeling and sensitivity. Fell purpose there means like deadly. It's interesting that she's using images of strength, which are arguably masculine. My fell or mighty, terrible or deadly purpose. Previously she said that her valour was in her tongue. Now it seems like the might be elsewhere. Is it because she has been unsexed and this might is coming to her from outside, from the spirits? And look what Shakespeare's doing with the iambic pentameter too. Shake here is a good example of what's called initial inversion, when you get a stressed syllable at the start of the line. That no compunctious visitings of nature shake my fell purpose, nor keep peace between the effect and it. So we've had come, you spirits, then unsex, second imperative, then third, fill me, fourth, make thick, fifth, stop up, and then we've got again sixth, come to my woman's breasts and take my milk for gall. So gall is a waste product like bile. So here you've got a comparison or stark juxtaposition of milk from breasts and then gall as a waste product. What gives life and is associated with motherhood, breastfeeding, nurturing, the milk, now becomes basically a poison, a waste product, a toxin, gall. Think about what this symbolises about Lady Macbeth as a woman and how it means that paired with Lady Macduff as a foil to her, it's another example of doubling within the play, a structural device. Different critics have interpreted take my milk for gall in different ways. One line of thinking is that take means replace with, so replace my milk with gall. Another suggests that it means nourish yourselves with my milk. But the most probable seems to be it means infect. Thinking about the atmosphere introduced by the witches, the fog and filthy air, that one seems the most apt. This is a play dominated by images of sickness. It's the only Shakespeare play with two doctors in it, and Macbeth, in one of his final speeches, says, "I'm sick at heart." You murdering ministers. Now finally she's mentioned the word that we know has been really hanging over all her comments, lurking between and beneath the lines of everything she's said. Murdering ministers. Except she doesn't say that she is the murderer, it's the ministers instead. So the powers of darkness that she's now invoking. You murdering ministers. But at least now she's mentioned it. At least now it's out in the open. Even if there's a slight dodge here, because it's them apparently doing the murdering. Wherever in your sightless substances you wait on nature's mischief. Now, mischief here means catastrophe or misfortune, and wait on means attend on. You can't get possessed unless the devil is somehow invited in. So here, by asking them, come, you spirits, she's opened herself up to something that for now she thinks is going to help her, but of course later across the play really undoes her. Come, thick night, and pull thee in the dunnest smoke of hell. Look how the imperatives are continuing. Come. And dunnest, superlative, is an echo of direst earlier. Dunnest means darkest, murkiest, or gloomiest, so it continues the atmosphere symbolised by the raven, and it might also be to do with moral obfuscation or obscurity. She mentions she doesn't want her keen knife to see the wound it makes. There's also perhaps a deliberate attempt to hide from herself and from her conscience the evil of what she knows she is doing. It's as if she can't bear to look upon it. The thick night also echoes her thick blood. One is about not seeing, the other is about not feeling. And of course, the reason she doesn't want to see is because she doesn't want to feel. Remember, later on, she tells Macbeth that had Duncan not resembled her father as he slept, she'd have done it. But the sight is what terrified her. This should be related to Macbeth's request for the eye to wink at the hand. It's also about a kind of civil war among the senses. Psychomachia, war within the soul. Remember that one element of tragedy, one generic convention, is the tendency towards disorder, and we see that in individual characters' minds, as well as in relationships and in the kingdom at large. And her language of hell here, you could argue, echoes Macbeth's stars hide your fires, let not light see my black and deep desires. He also talked about how he burned to know more of what the witches had to say. But right at the end, it seems that the function of the darkness isn't actually so she can creep up on Duncan and he can't notice her like she's some kind of ninja. Instead, it's that then her keen knife won't have to see the wound it makes. It's so she doesn't have to watch what she's doing. And even the imagery she uses about the blanket of the dark has something oddly comforting about it. The blanket as something that gives warmth and safety to an infant, for example. Blanket is an echo of the wrapping, covering or draping that was suggested by Paul earlier. So Paul and blanket work as a pair of images. So at her most masculine moment in the play, when she is asking the spirits to unsex her, there's something oddly feminine about her. And she talks about the knife seeing rather than her eye. So she's removing her own body parts from her imagined version of the act. There's an evasion of agency in the language. It's the knife that makes the wound, rather than herself.
Describe her as like inhumane.
Yeah, but don't oversimplify it. Yes, she's inhumane in some ways, but the language she's using betrays the very humanity that she's trying to remove. So there's an element of fear there. There's an element of compunctious visitings of nature, despite what she says. Remember that from the time that the messenger comes in and informs Lady Macbeth that Duncan is coming to Inverness that evening. After he leaves, she doesn't mention Macbeth until Macbeth actually enters. This is odd because it means that she is now planning the murder, visualising it, asking the spirits to unsex her, and yet making no reference or even allusion to Macbeth whatsoever. So it's as if she's going to commit the crime individually, despite having been called his dearest partner in greatness. Make sure you comment on how the imperatives give her a commanding tone as well. I've put them all in blue so you can see where they are. You could also comment on some of the metrical variations on iambic pentameter, like come, for example, and stop, where we get stressed syllables where we would not normally expect to. This is to bring out the importance of these words thematically and also show the sense of emotional agitation in her voice. When he does enter, we need to think about how the dynamic changes. At the point when Macbeth enters, after she says, nor heaven peeped the blanket of the dark to cry, hold, hold, This is the first time we've seen Macbeths on stage together. So that enter Macbeth stage direction is significant because now we're going to see something we haven't yet seen before. The two of them interacting. So let's think about what our first impressions of them on stage together are from this. The first thing to note is that Macbeth only speaks about 15 words in the 20 lines of dialogue. So they're on stage together for 20 lines of dialogue, but Macbeth only speaks 15 words. I haven't bothered to count Lady Macbeth's words, but it's a lot. So that might tell us something about the dynamic between the two of them. One idea could be that Lady Macbeth seems dominant. That is the standard reading that most people go for. But I think Shakespeare is probably a little bit more subtle than that. What have we just seen Macbeth do with the letter?
Over-exaggerate.
Over-exaggerate, but also, crucially, not include what?
Banquet.
Banquo, the fact that Malcolm's been named Prince of Cumberland, and didn't mention what happened with Banquo and the prophecies either. So he's left out some details that would put the brakes on the plan a bit, that might temper Lady Macbeth's reaction. Everything about the letter seemed designed to inflame her excitement and ambition.
Well, I mean, it sort of makes sense. It does make logical sense that she's the one doing most of the speaking, because in a sense he's already spoken to her with the form of the letter. He's told her all the information he's gained from the battle. She hasn't told him all of the stuff she's thinking, so it's not really something unusual in that sense. Nothing's really happened to him since he's written a letter and arrived there.
Okay, so one way of looking at it might be that he's got nothing left to say because the letter said it all. That might be true if we think of him as just an information imparting machine. But if we think of him as a human being who wants to talk about his experiences in the great battle that he's just fought, which they barely mention, and he barely mentioned in his letter, she might have some curiosity about that, and he might want to tell her what it was like, or be happy to see her again. He also might want to talk about his feelings about the letter in more detail with her when he finally sees her face to face. After all, being present with someone is more intimate than just communicating to them in a fairly rushed, short letter that you're sending ahead of yourself as you are on your way to greet them fully. One way to think about the fact he doesn't say very much could be that it continues the fairly manipulative attitude he took towards the situation in the letter. So if he doesn't appear all that excited about the prospect of her plans, killing the king, the kingship in general, what it might do is mean that she has to supply the energy in this discussion about what they might do next. The fact that he's playing it cool means that she is the one who has to drive it. And then he sits there listening as she talks him into it. So he might be wanting to do more than he actually lets on here, but by staying quiet, it means that she fills in the blanks, as it were. Yeah.
So do you think it's significant that like the last word for Macbeth is to cry hold, and that Macbeth's last words are down in the first cries hold?
Macbeth's last words are,
down be him the first cries hold.
ooh, interesting. I hadn't thought about that before. It may well be. Let's think. Macbeth here, at that moment with Macduff, having said that he didn't want to kill him, now realises there's no point holding back. And he compares himself to a bear that's tied to a stake. He knows he's going to die at this point, but he may as well fight on. He says he won't play the Roman and kill himself. So it might be a reference to his earlier image about being halfway through the river of blood, and he may as well keep going now and fully committing to the deed. In that case, it's going to be a contrast between the two of them. So Lady Macbeth at the beginning is the one who doesn't want there to be any holding back. By the end, she wishes it could all be undone and can never remove the blood from her hands. Whereas Macbeth is the one who has the reservations at the start, but by the end, says, I've come this far, I'm going to keep going. So it could be another reversal. Well spotted. So she greets him, great glance, worthy corridor, greater than both by the all hail hereafter. Two truths as happy prologues to the swelling act of the imperial theme. Glance, corridor, the all hail hereafter. So she is using the language that Macbeth used in his two truths aside earlier. One way to think about her is as a megaphone for the inner voice that Macbeth has that's pulling him towards the murder. The trouble is that within him, that is perhaps no louder than, maybe even quieter than, the voice of his conscience. Thy letters have transported me beyond this ignorant present, and I feel now the future in the instant. This reminds us of Macbeth's state of mind. Present fears are less than horrible imaginings. Function is smothered in surmise, his state of mind when he was thinking about the witch's prophecies. Except that, whereas he mentioned his fears of the future, overcoming his present state of mind, here it seems to be excitement. She's ecstatic almost, feeling the future in the instant. But both of them seem very much detached from the present. It's a fairly cutting irony, isn't it, that Lady Macbeth begins entirely focused on the future, so much so that she feels it as if it's right now, whereas at the end of the play, she's locked in the past. She can't escape the memory, the guilt of what Macbeth's done. Feeling the future in the instant is also another and a very powerful example of haste or speed in the play. It's as if she is already there, having hastened through the present. My dearest love, Duncan comes here tonight. Is there anything surprising about that response? She's just greeted him, talking about the double thainship, the kingship as well, and saying that she's looking ahead to the future. Macbeth's first response is fairly blunt and flat. Duncan comes here tonight. Has he mentioned anything about killing Duncan in the letter? No. We know from before he appeared on stage that she's just spent the last 20 lines or so thinking about exactly that. So when he says as his first remark, Duncan comes here tonight, it's as if he knows she has been thinking about Duncan. Has he been too? What do we know about him? What made his seated heart knock against his ribs, against the use of nature? What thought? My thought, whose murder yet is but fantastical, shakes so my single state of man. So Macbeth has also been thinking about killing Duncan in Act 1, Scene 3. Maybe he assumes from the way he worded the letter and his knowledge of Lady Macbeth that she has also been thinking about killing Duncan. So his first line here, his first comment, Duncan comes here tonight, acknowledges the plotting that they've both been doing without stating it explicitly. It brings the correct topic up. It's important to notice that Shakespeare uses antillabe or shared lines in the next moments of the dialogue. This means that when one character stops speaking, it isn't yet a full line of iambic pentameter, and the next character's first words continue the meter of the previous line. This has the effect not only of speeding up the pace of the dialogue, perhaps reflecting some of the emotional anxiety and tension that we see in the exchange between the two of them here, but it also has the effect of interlocking it, so it makes them seem more unified, as if they are finishing each other's sentences. But there's a potential element of irony or conflict here as well, because Macbeth, remember, seems to be quite cool in comparison to Lady Macbeth's very much inflamed desires. It's as if she finishes his sentences to make sure they arrive at the conclusion that she wants. Remember that dialogue is the heart of drama, and not many people talk about variation in sentence length or line length. Get into the habit of looking for and thinking about antillabe, because it's a great way to make your answer stand out. And when goes hence, tomorrow, as he purposes, oh never shall sun that morrow see. Your face, my thane, is as a book where men may read strange matters. The word strange, by now, is starting to be one of the snowball words that slowly accumulates extra associations. Remember the witches, say from whence you owe this strange intelligence, and Macbeth on the battlefield, making strange images of death. In fact, the word strange occurs 20 times across the whole play, and this is a great example of a word being repeated as a structural device. David Lodge, in The Language of Fiction, argues that the perception of repetition is the first step towards offering an account of the way language works in extended literary texts. One of the best ways for you to revise Macbeth is to choose words like strange, weird, blood, and to follow them through the play. Done or deed would also be great ones. We also know that his face is quite easy to read because Banquo, for example, look how our partner's rapt, when he was thinking about the witch's prophecies and what it meant for him and what he might do about Duncan. So he's not speaking many words, but looking at his face, she knows something is going on. It's like a book where you can read strange matters. In the banquet scene later, this will become a big problem, and Lady Macbeth will say, "Why do you make such faces?" worried that it's going to give them away. To beguile the time, look like the time, bear welcome in your eye, your hand, your tongue. Look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. Look at the language of division here again. So if you want to trick people, then you need to blend in. Don't give yourself away. This is to do with division. False face must hide what the false heart doth know. We've seen the language of their senses being at war with each other. Let the eye wink at the hand is one from Macbeth. Lady Macbeth as well. Her knife doesn't see the wound it makes. So there's a sense of duplicity, and you could argue this is also to do with the sense of internal conflict. Psychomachia, internal division within both characters. Psychomachia. Psyche is in mind, machia, war. War within the soul, yeah. So tragedy is about the tendency towards disorder over the course of the whole plot. And you see that on the social level in terms of the biggest social structures like the kingdom. Then you've also got it in terms of personal relationships like marriages. And then you've also got it in terms of the protagonist's individual mind as well.
It's like loads of different layers of that.
That's it, exactly. Now the image of the serpent and the flower, some critics argue, is also an allusion to the Garden of Eden. So Lady Macbeth, in that case, is a bit like Eve, who is first seduced by the devil in the form of the serpent and also leads Adam astray. So if you go for the Lady Macbeth as temptress reading, the one who talks Macbeth into it, then that's a line of thought that has some mileage. But as we've been saying, it seems that Macbeth isn't quite as innocent as that reading might imply. It's not like he's entirely against the murder and she has to work very hard to push him into it. We've seen that one way to think about it is that he partly encourages her to encourage him through what he doesn't tell her and through how blunt his responses are to her in this dialogue. Remember, only 15 words in 20 lines of dialogue. An image of a snake among flowers is also found on the medal commemorating the discovery of the gunpowder plot. So it alludes to that and ties Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's plot against the king here to that plot.
So,
Yep.
on the page before, Macbeth says, "My dearest love, Duncan comes here tonight." That's like the second time he's said a few affectionate words towards her. She doesn't seem to ever reciprocate, at least not so far.
I won't catch that point. So in the letter, "My dearest partner of greatness," and then Macbeth greeting her, "My dearest love." Lady Macbeth, on the other hand, doesn't seem to reciprocate that affection. Perhaps this is because she's so focused on what she wants to happen next, the planning, One interesting point in relation to that is that the only time she calls him my husband in the whole play is when he appears with the bloody daggers having killed Duncan. The only time she calls him my husband is then, just once. It's as if he then has earned the title, like it's a kind of badge of honour. The language she uses before the killing about only once you've done it will you be a man. When you just do it, then you are so much more the man, might actually suggest there's something sexual about it. After he's killed Duncan and she sees him walking back, having done what she wanted with the daggers dripping in blood, she's turned on by it. And in the Patrick Stewart film version, actually, you can see her getting aroused. And when they're talking about the murder, it's something that has really impressed her about Macbeth. It's like it's proof of his virility and masculinity that he's willing to do this. Disturbingly, Macbeth actually compares himself on the way to Duncan's bedchamber to Tarquin, who was a rapist. Even in Macbeth's mind then, sex and murder seem oddly combined. He that's coming must be provided for, and you shall put this night's great business into my dispatch, which shall to all our nights and days to come give solely sovereign sway and masterdom. Some people think that when she says, put this night's great business into my dispatch here, dispatch primarily means like put to death. I'm going to be the one who kills Duncan, as if she has now planned to do it herself in this scene. But its primary meaning is actually just manage. Like, let me think this through. Put this in my care. The secondary meaning is to put to death, like to dispatch someone. So dispatch here is more like, I'm going to do the admin. Let me finish off the plans. Of course, she has no hand in the actual murder. Macbeth is the one who actually does the killing later. Despite the fact that in her speech previously, before he arrives on stage, she made no reference to him and talks about my knife. She has no part in the actual killing. So you could argue at most that dispatch shows she's still at the forefront of the planning, thinking through exactly what's to be done. Note the irony as well in that concluding couplet, days to come, masterdom. Of course, that's exactly what doesn't happen. The nights become sleepless and tortured for Macbeth. For Lady Macbeth, when she does sleep, she sleepwalks in nightmares. She can't forget what she's done. And Macbeth is constantly paranoid, feeling threatened that his sovereign sway and masterdom is insecure because of Fleance and also because of Macduff. So this is a good example of irony, a contrast between the expected and the actual. She sounds very confident here, hubristically so perhaps, and we know in tragedy that pride comes before a fall. So the couplet there, come masterdom, conveys a sense of confidence. It's as if it clinches the speech, giving it a sense of finality. But that is exactly what the play undermines as it progresses. She also uses the masculine noun masterdom, which is an interesting point, given that she's just asked for the spirits to unsex her. Macbeth, and this is where I think the bluntness of his response is interesting to think about again, just says, we will speak further. So barely a half line in response to Lady Macbeth's lengthy speech, which is very impassioned and triumphant in its tone. We will speak further. Could this be read as suggesting, well, maybe this is what's going to happen. Needs to be discussed further. I'm not quite sure yet.
Does the dash after his line and her line halfway down though not mean that he's been interrupted?
I've got no dash in the version I'm looking at here, but if there is a dash...
And then a line break for her line to come in partway through after.
If there's a dash there, it means an interruption,
Yeah,
definitely.
So, it could have mean
So if you get a dash after further, it means that Macbeth might have wanted to say more, or Lady Macbeth jumps in, doing the speaking further right now, this second, because she's so keen to keep the momentum going. Only look up clear, to alter favour, ever is to fear. leave all the rest to me. Our nights and days to come is the first person plural being used for the first time. Our nights and days to come. Remember, dearest partner of greatness. So it's interesting that having used our nights and days to come, she ends on what word? Me. So try to avoid having too simplistic a reading of the scene. There are plenty of tensions, nuances, subtleties, ambiguities for you to explore. On the one hand, she seems very much focused on the two of them as a pair and what the future might hold for them. But on the other hand, she didn't mention Macbeth when invoking the spirits and imagining the murder. And she seems very much concerned that at the end here, my dispatch, i.e. let me manage it, and leave all the rest to me. What was her criticism of Macbeth after she read the letter?
He's gentle.
Yeah, too much full of the milk of human kindness to catch the nearest way. Ambitious, but without the illness that should attend it. What thou wouldst highly, that wouldst thou holily. Wouldst not play false, yet wouldst wrongly win. So she thinks perhaps she can't trust him to get this done. He might be too afraid to do it. And Macbeth, through his responses in the scene, arguably has maybe confirmed that impression. We will speak further isn't the most approving response to what she's just said. It seems to mean further discussion needs to follow. So it's a cool response. It's one that might not enthuse her about his willingness to go ahead with it. So she's saying, keep calm. Don't let people read your face. To alter favour ever is to fear. Make sure your face isn't like a book wherein men can read strange matters. When you analyse this moment, make sure you explain that clear means cheerfully and favour means facial appearance. Those words mean something slightly different in Shakespeare's time from what they do now. So act like nothing's going on. Leave all the rest to me. She uses a couplet again, making her final moments of dialogue in this scene double couplets, deepening the impression of confidence and willpower. So this scene now, as it ends, has got what kind of forward momentum? There's no curtain between this and the next scene. What happens in the next scene? Who's coming in?
Duncan.
Right, good. The procession, Duncan, and he says, "This castle hath a pleasant seat. The air nimbly and sweetly recommends itself unto our gentle senses." Another example of Duncan, like he misread MacDonald, and like he arguably misreads Macbeth too, calling him a peerless kinsman. Another example of Duncan not quite knowing exactly what is going on around him. He's very trusting. So the forward momentum is Lady Macbeth plotting, planning to kill him. Macbeth being told to keep a calm face and let her manage what the plan is. So that forward momentum is carried into the next scene. Duncan enters, and there's this great contrast between what's just happened and what follows next. This scene I just call the Raven scene. The Raven himself is hoarse, that croaks the fatal entrance of Duncan under my battlements. It's the first threshold in the play. And the Raven, to do with the omen of death, is the keynote. The next scene, a few lines in, Banquo mentions the temple haunting Martlet. The temple haunting Martlet, the little bird whose nest is on the outside of the castle walls. So these two birds then are important symbols, juxtaposed. The Raven is to do with death, whereas the Martlet, Banquo uses images of fertility and life form.
In like the glossary, it says that the Mard is also in Shakespeare's time, someone who was used before.
Yeah, exactly. The Martlet, a bit like Duncan, it's because it nests are just on the exterior of the walls. It's to do with just basically judging a book by its cover. I think that's what Duncan is doing. So Lady Macbeth talking about Macbeth's face being one thing, but him hiding everything else. Duncan is like a martlet towards Macbeth. He just goes by the outside of the castle. He doesn't notice what's going on inside. they're known for making nests in churches. So it associates the martlet with not just fertility, but with the divine. So it heightens the contrast to the raven that's just come before. So Banquo now mentions the pendant bed and the procreant cradle. Pendant bed and procreant cradle. So the procreant cradle is about life and the little chicks. This means that Lady Macbeth, who's just talked about her milk being taken for gall, unsex me here, is now being placed in opposition to the martlet, whose nest, cradle, is to do with procreation, birth. So if we think of the raven as being like a symbol of Lady Macbeth, bringing death, eating the chicks of other birds, a bit like Lady Macduff's children are murdered by Macbeth, the martlet represents everything she's not, but it also ties her into the larger symbolic network of the whole play. Like Fleance, for example, Banquo's son, is powerful because Macbeth has no children. At the end, when he visits the witches, Act 4, Scene 1, to find out about the future, and there are the apparitions, one of them is a naked baby holding a bough from the wood. And that is in some ways the beginning of the end for him, because it prophesies his downfall. When at the end of the play, the forest marches on Dunsinane, it's a reference to what tends to happen in comedies, which is the world of the forest. The wood is to do with regeneration and new life. So the baby holding the bough links nature, greenery, life, the forest, with fertility as well. So children, paradoxically, are actually very powerful in the play. Later on, there's an image where Macbeth worries about what will happen after Duncan is killed, and there's this really weird image of a naked newborn babe striding the blast. So it's a naked newborn baby, but it's striding this blast of wind, as if it has a great power. So he's afraid of children, because he hasn't got any.
You sort of read it as a way of Shakespeare saying that time is not on his side. Eventually, it's all going to go wrong. And the moment he basically kills Duncan, he puts a stopwatch on his own life, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that's a nice way to think about it. Time and the hour run through the roughest day. And then at the end, the time is free. It's as if Macbeth, ultimately, because he has no heir, has a power that is limited. And that is what gnaws away at him the most. Yeah.
So what I understand is, you know how I was really worried about Banquo's sons being king?
Yeah.
If he has no heir, why is he worried about that? Because it's conceivable that he could be king and they could be king.
Right. So he worries that he has given his eternal jewel to the common enemy of man, i.e. his soul now is the devil's. And he's got no heir to continue it on. So it seems empty or hollow to him. Because despite having gained the whole world but lost his own soul, to use the biblical image, he's going to have nothing to show for it on his deathbed. His legacy won't continue. So he's got an internal punishment for quite, in retrospect, brief gain in the world. Here's an overview of some of the basic points you should be making about this scene. In your introduction, show that you understand why this moment matters in the overall structure of the play. It gives us our first impression of Lady Macbeth. It shows her being informed of the inciting incident for the whole tragedy, what the witches told Macbeth. It develops the conflict between the Macbeths and Duncan, but also between the Macbeths themselves, and within Lady Macbeth, between her femininity and her ambitions. Remember, a good introduction situates the extract within the context of the structure of the whole play. Break the scene into 3 sections. The first is from the beginning until the messenger enters. Here we can see that Macbeth's tone in his letter is joyous and certain. He hides his inner turmoil that we saw in his 2 truths are told soliloquy in Act 1, Scene 3. There's an argument, therefore, that the manipulation between the two of them is reciprocal. Lady Macbeth responds in a way that is both confident and fearful.
She's confident that what the witches have prophesied will in fact come true, yet she is fearful that Macbeth lacks the character traits necessary to achieve this by the nearest way. So she sees herself as the source of his courage, saying that her power is in her words. The middle section is from when the messenger enters to when Macbeth enters. Here, the key points are that she wishes to become totally cruel, and yet she also wants the crime hidden in darkness, and she wants to hide behind her weapon. She doesn't refer to Macbeth, but also distances herself from the deed. So that middle section should really be about exploring some of the conflicts and tensions within her character. Remember, in Shakespeare, the characters are round, complex, flawed, like people are in real life. So even at what is most commonly thought of as being her most masculine or most evil moment in the play, we can still see signs that things aren't quite that simplistic. The last section is when Macbeth enters. Here, she is ecstatic, feeling the future in the instant, but he is oddly deadpan. Is this because he wants her to talk him into it? Note the interesting change in the dynamic. She began the scene speaking his words, but the plan is for him to act on hers. To conclude, I would explore the symbolic contrast of the raven and the martlet in the scene that follows, thinking about those two important images as structural devices for some of the main thematic oppositions of the play. You should also explain how this scene has set up dramatic irony when Duncan enters next, and also think about how it fits into the overall portrayal of Lady Macbeth. When we first meet her, she is reading a letter, thinking about the future. In her last scene, she is writing a letter and trapped in the past. So the letter becomes a structural device for Shakespeare's portrayal of Lady Macbeth across the whole play. If you want to know more about irony in his presentation of her character, look up the separate video I made about that.